So this is, in some ways, we're talking about different ways of emotional regulation. And one of the things I'd like to focus on now is what we call ethical mindfulness. I've given some touches of it today, some touches of it yesterday. This isn't something that's actually in your book. But you could switch to the emotional regulation area, because that's probably the next place we're going to be doing some work in this book. Emotional regulation 1. It's the, yeah, okay. So I wanted to just, before I talked about aims of practice, and now we're going to actually shift. One of the things that has been true in the mindfulness-based stress reduction boom, some people call it the McMindfulness, this kind of corporate America taking on using the term mindfulness and not actually having an accurate perspective of how it's used and how it's helpful. But seeing the research and the evidence-based practice and then putting it towards some not that helpful ways. Focus and attention can be very helpful in a lot of different ways. And without the ethical component to it, it can do some damage, actually. So I think that this is why I like to bring this rounded view. And my friend David Smith, he wrote a book called Ethical Mindfulness, and it's just a little online book. It's about 80 pages or something, and it's, I think, $5 or something like that. It's an excellent book, actually. I was encouraging him to expand it and make a hard copy. We'll see. So, but what I wanted to do is focus on what's considered the heart practice. And like I said, we've touched on it some. A lot of this is about emotional regulation and looking at where we're out of balance. One of the ways it's thought about is that mindfulness is one wing, and compassion or heart practice is another wing, and it takes both wings for someone to fly, or for a bird to fly, right? So this kind of idea of freedom or peace and ease being the kind of body of the bird, like a quetzal bird or like a phoenix, right? It takes both energies of mindfulness and compassion, both in our own work and in the work that we do with others. So just to focus on some of this. So kindness, we've been talking about this a little bit. So may I be at ease. We did some of this yesterday, right? The kindness practice. May I be at ease. May I be happy. May I be peaceful. Very helpful, actually, especially when people are very dysregulated. Just may I be at ease. May I be at ease. Actually using that phrase over and over and over calms the parasympathetic nervous system. So the idea that bringing in compassion and forgiveness, like I was talking a little bit about earlier, so necessary when we're going against difficult things. The appropriate response to suffering is compassion. The appropriate response to pain is compassion. So from the mindfulness perspective, this is the kind of ethical way to be working with folks. It's from a compassionate stance. And we have to start here. A lot of times what I see that happens is that we get very compassionate about other people in the world and even other places in the world, right? But right here at home, maybe less compassionate. Right in our families, maybe less compassionate. Right in our hearts, less compassionate. And so the practice really has to start from an internal experience. If we can be compassionate to ourselves, then we can truly be compassionate to others. Otherwise, I actually see it sometimes, it can be an avoidance tactic. I'm avoiding my own suffering by being compassionate towards others. Sometimes it actually works the opposite way. I want to just give voice to that. Sometimes it's so painful internally that if I can focus my compassion or my kindness outward, then I can actually develop it enough to be able to then allow some to come inward. So I want to also make room for that, because I think that there's some truth there. I've definitely seen some very difficult, there's been some very difficult people that I've worked with who had zero amount of self-love, zero amount of self-worth, zero amount, at least it was like inaccessible. And the only way that they can really, it was like, oh, can you send loving kindness to your dog? Can you send loving kindness to your cat? Can you send loving kindness to your little baby brother? First, for a long time. And then eventually going within. So we have to be skillful in how we do that. We don't just bulldoze right ahead. So this appreciation or appreciative joy is what it's called sometimes. Appreciation of self and others. Right? May I learn to appreciate the happiness, joy, and success that I experience or that you experience. This is, I think, so important in our culture. Someone actually, we were talking about it yesterday around the joy of watching somebody else like achieve a goal. I used to work in high school and see a lot of people graduate that they didn't think they would ever graduate high school. And the joy that I would receive, the filling up, right, is very important. And also in the like my friend who wrote this book, Ethical Mindfulness. There was envy, and then on the other side of envy was joy. If I was able to let go of the separation, they're like, well, how come I should have written that book, right? On the other side of that was joy. So this appreciative joy is this kind of appreciating our own achievements, our own hard work, our own original goodness, our own successes, and the successes in others. Actually, the idea here is so that we have more connection. We're less disconnected. If I have to find a way to separate because it's hard for me to... We do this, don't we? We find a way to separate because I'm jealous of something. Or there's some envy, jealousy, separation. So this appreciative joy allows us to feel more connected as a culture, as a community, as an agency. Okay? And that's why I actually encourage us all to practice this. So practice finding the joys with our clients, appreciating the successes of our clients, patients, appreciating the joys of others, of others, people's successes. And just, I feel like this can be really helpful as far as like our staff goes, And sometimes when I'm working with families and young people, we actually do this practice. It's just going around appreciating other families, other kids, or having parents appreciate their kids. Like even though they're totally arguing all the time, and the kids, there's all these problems that they're coming to see you for. Every once in a while, I just like to break that up and just go, actually, I'd like for you to appreciate mom, dad, appreciate your son or daughter for something that they're doing right, for something that they're doing well. And that can be a real challenge. And then I actually do this whole thing where I have the kid look them right in the eye and say, thank you for noticing. And then I say, okay, now, son or daughter, appreciate your parents for something. And then the parents actually have to look the kids in the eye and say, thank you for noticing. And I've seen it just alter. It can totally alter the dynamic of a family to do this kind of thing. So to actually bring this into your practice. We do multifamily groups. I don't know if you guys do multifamily groups in one of the agencies that I worked at. And multifamily groups are very helpful because it's not just about you and them, right? You guys do multifamily groups?
We're starting.
They're super helpful. Yeah. Once we get through the parental shame and guilt and the teen resistance, once you get through that,
That is easy.
then it's all cake. So this equanimity, this emotional balance, this has been the overarching theme of a lot of DBT and a lot of our mindfulness practice, this idea of emotional balance, both for our patients and clients and for ourselves. And how does this play out? Well, part of this is, may I learn to understand that my happiness and well-being is dependent upon my own actions, not on my wishes. So this allows us to kind of back away and really see, okay, how are we acting in the world? And that actually the same thing is true for our patients and clients. That we can have all kinds of good intention for them, but if they're not actually putting any of the, like we can give them all kinds of advice, even though I always tell people I don't give advice. They go, well, what do you do? I help you to help yourself. That's what I do. But this idea of holding, that we don't have to take on the responsibility, and we don't also take on the successes either. It's theirs. I think it allows us to have some emotional balance. Thoughts, questions, reflections about this? The heart practice, this ethical mindfulness, it's so important, and these are all actually practices. They're meditation practices, right? So just like yesterday, I gave some instruction around, just sitting for 5 minutes. May I be happy. May I be peaceful. May I be free from suffering. If the breath meditation is hard for you, just get some simple phrases, right? May I live with ease. May I be healthy and strong. The compassion practice, the forgiveness practice. My forgiveness practice, for me, is very helpful of just a very general. I just practiced it generally. I forgive you. I forgive myself. This idea of bringing forgiveness out. And it's not the worst thing, right? But someone who's just outside of your heart, someone who maybe pissed you off that day or cut you off. I forgive you. All the ways in which we have caused harm to ourselves. I forgive myself. And then the last thing is, may I be forgiven. This can be very similar to prayer in some way. Yes?
I've actually, the forgiveness part, what you're saying, it's actually really true. And I use it, and I actually really do forgive people who do things to me. And it's weird because you feel that negative energy. When you truly forgive somebody, you feel the energy just leave your body. It's like a negative, it's crazy. Honestly, it feels weird, and then after you forgive, you don't feel awkward around that person, because if you could say that you forgive, but if you don't truly forgive, then it's not going to work.
It's a huge practice, yeah. He's just saying that I'm right.
Yeah, it's not. I live by that.
Right.
I don't like acting weird around people.
Right.
People,
and we make mistakes. And it's important for us to forgive ourselves too. That's the other piece, right?
That's the hardest thing.
That can be the most challenging one. But so we start where we can, Thanks for saying that, Chris. The idea of, I forgive you, and we're talking about little and big things, right? But we have to start where we can. I have this good friend of mine who was driving with his grandfather when he was 12, 13 years old, and they were hit by a drunk driver. And this drunk driver was actually the director of a drug and alcohol treatment facility. And his grandfather died and he didn't. And they sued him for all kinds of money. But the work, this person who's a friend of mine, the work of him going through that forgiveness took 10, 15 years, of repeatedly, because it comes back, right? But the every time the letting okay, here it is again, and I'm going to let it go again, and it will come back and come back. And one of the things that he mentioned is, it comes back less and less every time. So even really big ones like that, to the very small. And the idea of that we don't just forgive one time, and that it's for our benefit, not for them. That's what you're saying, yeah. Yes, in the back.
I was going to say you're right on that part too. What we learned by having grown up is if you don't forgive, right, you have anger, right, and you can never improve yourself or go forward, right? So
Right.
I think I had 15 years to constantly get forgiving because you want to let go. You're right, not forgiving yourself.
Right. Yeah.
Same thing when my mom took my life when I was like 17 years old. She left when I was 2. You grow up with all that hatred for her, right?
Yeah.
So you can never move forward. So you can never have you grow up and now you just like, hey, now we're kind of like,
Yeah.
better stuff, you forgive, you really move forward. So I have to be
Yeah.
not for them, more for us.
Right. Of course, this isn't my concept, right? I was just being playful. But this is a universal concept of forgiveness, found in probably just about every religion. And so the idea of forgiveness and as a practice, and how can we, so we're not going to necessarily let lead our patients with okay, so you need to forgive your, abuser, the person that abandoned you. That's what you need to do in therapy, because that's not skillful. But to find ways, like we're doing here, looking at judgments, looking at ways in which we hold, looking at what's blocking us from our own peace and ease. What's keeping addiction going? What's keeping anxiety around relationships? Generally things that we haven't let go of.
There are people who the idea of forgiveness is like anathema to them, that they can't do it, they can't imagine it.
Right.
So you really have to look at what's walking around.
Yeah. Yeah, and I also think start where you can. Like the person that I started with, like the people that would cut me off in traffic. Instead of, damn you, I forgive you.
People down in window, I forgive you.
Yeah, not about them. Not about them, about me. Right? I commute every day on a very dangerous highway. And every day there's, the little Tesla or the little Beamer or something that's cutting me. I drive a truck, right? I'm still in Tacoma. I'm just constantly, so it's always a practice. Kindness and forgiveness.
Positive stuff.
Yeah, stop signs. Stops are good. Yeah. Will you stop? We're actually going to get to stop in a minute. So this idea, so for me, this is a fundamental in mindfulness. And in a lot of modalities, it's not actually adapted yet. And so I feel like this is where there's a lot of therapeutic value. And okay, for us, so how can we hold folks in kindness? Right? And how can we be kind to ourselves when we get stuck? When we have a hard day? Right? These are the important, I think there are some important aspects. So the compassion and forgiveness practice, how can we be compassionate towards the suffering that our patients or clients are causing themselves? And how can we be compassionate towards the pain and suffering the suffering that we're causing ourselves?
Acknowledging our limitations of being human. Some of our patients suffering a lot.
Yeah.
And so then I think at some point we have to limit ourselves. I cannot give this person anything.
That's right. Can you be a little bit louder? You're asking if you can.
So the idea, you want me to leave just saying that? The idea of the capacity of us as human beings and the acknowledgement of our limitations. And that we have to also, I think, recognize that there are some that are maybe beyond our help at this moment. I think, yeah? That idea of they're doing the best they can. And maybe we have to actually accept this is the imperfection, right? We have to accept that we can't help them all the time. Yeah. And that for some actually, I've kicked people out of our program or asked people to leave or referred them out. And that I've actually had people come back and tell me that was the best thing you could do for me. Is actually, and I've seen it a lot. So we have to really look at professional enabling. When are we doing professional enabling? When are we keeping clients around because we're hoping for the best? And instead of actually letting them go for a time or referring them to another place, and in a type of community like this, they'll cycle. They're not going far, right? They'll cycle around, right?
And understanding it's a process.
That's right, and understanding it's a process, especially around mental health, around healing, around trauma, And to do that not as defeat, but as it's the next appropriate thing. That's the equanimity piece. That's this emotional balance piece. And it's not a personal failure, actually, also. So what we're kind of moving into is like both how to work with patients and clients, but also how do we stay in self-care ourselves? And how do we avoid compassion fatigue? You guys heard of the term compassion fatigue? I talked about the other day, otherwise known as burnout. Right? I'd invite you, actually, there's a free online compassion fatigue kind of survey that has measuring components. And I forgot to put it in the handbook. It was an afterthought. But it's very helpful. I can send you the link to it.
There's one on dealing with trauma as well.
There's one on dealing with trauma. Yeah, like vicarious trauma. Yeah. Yeah, vicarious trauma is huge. So compassion fatigue is this, I just feel tapped out because I'm not actually taking care of myself and I'm completely taking care of other people all the time. Or I'm output, and I'm not giving myself enough. And so then our ability to deal, I've noticed this a lot in my own life. And like I said, after 15 years of working front lines in a nonprofit agency, I quit. And I quit primarily because I was just burned out. And then I, traveled. I went to India. I went to Southeast Asia. I did a lot of meditation. I took some mindfulness-based stress reduction courses. And then I took a different direction. Went back to school. Starts really getting into the mindfulness-based stress reduction, and then found another way to re-engage in the profession. That's just my personal story. Right? That's what I do. But I think it's important to recognize, right? Because again, without awareness, we can't do anything to change it. If we have awareness, oh wow, I have less in my reserves for other people's crap. And usually it's not at school. I mean, it's not at work. Where's the first place it goes? Home. Right? So it's a helpful piece. And then the vicarious trauma, oh my gosh. So when I first started, I was like 24 years old. I started working for the agency that I went to when I was a kid. The agency I was mandated to go to when I was 15, 16 years old. And so I started to hear my story every day, reliving some of the early experiences of my life through other people. And I would come home exhausted. and having dreams. It was PTSD, vicarious trauma, re-stimulated through other people's experiences. And so what did I do? Well, first I had to recognize it, talk to my clinical supervisor about it, get into therapy. Started going to the gym more, like doing things I needed to do to have self-care. So there's this concept of the wounded healer. Right? The wounded healer has to keep healing. Yeah. Hopefully this is relatable, yeah? This idea of vicarious trauma, it's really necessary. I'm glad you brought it up, yeah. I've worked a lot with, well, not a lot, but some, with paramedics, ambulance drivers, first responders, fire paramedics, lots of vicarious trauma. Police officers, so much. Soldiers, so much vicarious trauma. Seeing all the amount of craziness. CPS workers. Doesn't mean that we don't keep doing the work, but we also have to keep doing the work on ourselves. It seems like a pretty healthy group, though.
We actually have a self-care process.
Oh, good. There's a self-care process. So one of the reasons why I chose to work where I currently work, actually, is because of the amount of time they give off, the amount of paid time, the amount of ed leave, the amount of support around taking care of yourself. Because another agency I worked at for a long time, they just didn't have that. It wasn't their fault, it just was budget. All right, so let's look over here. Today I will live in the moment, unless the moment is unpleasant, in which case I will eat a cookie. You just did that? Did it work? Temporarily. So this is, it's just a funny joke of that, also pointing to how when things are unpleasant, we look outside, we look for something. Sometimes involuntarily. I remember this, there was a period of time, it's still a bit of a problem, but I'm not over the top. I have some control around this. As I think I do. Where I had a real Ben & Jerry's problem. Where when I was going, I would find either coming home from work in the evening, or if I was feeling stressed. This happened definitely when I was in grad school. I was feeling stressed, and then all of a sudden the idea of Jerry Garcia would come into my mind, and I go, okay, I justify to myself why I can take a break from this 50-page paper that I'm writing and go and have some Jerry Garcia. Yeah.
Can you read that?
Can I read this?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, yeah, I read it a few minutes ago. Today, I will live in the moment, unless the moment is unpleasant, in which case I will eat a cookie. So I was talking about how I began to take leave with Ben & Jerry's ice cream, and how I would go, and you go to the store, and they have Ben & Jerry's ice cream, and the little one, not the big, I mean, I guess they come really big now, but
The small
yeah,
serving.
but the medium size. How many servings do they say that there is? It's, I don't care what it says, it is only one serving. Right? I actually think it says 4 servings. 4 servings per the mid-size, right? And so what I would notice that I would do is I would notice the desire to do that, or sometimes I would go and I'd buy a few and have them in my freezer. And then when I would begin to, because I'm mindfully aware, right? Mindfully aware of distress in some way, and then the thought would pop in, Ben & Jerry's. Ben & Jerry's. This is an intolerable situation. I need to have some Ben & Jerry's. Jerry Garcia specifically. And then I'd started like I would take the lid off, I'd put the lid on the counter, and I'd start to eat. And then I'd look at the lid and I would think, no. And then there became a point where I just threw the lid away, right? Like this is my worst point, where I just take it, I look at, I just know I'm not even. I just throw the lid away and eat the whole thing.
You were a benzo-cream addict.
A benzo-cream addict. Yeah, exactly. And then well, it has a perfect combination of chocolate and fruit and vanilla. Ben and Jerry's Cherry Garcia is really good. We should get some for lunch. So what then happened is that at some point I realized, because I'd start getting sick, I started gaining weight, and I would realize really that actually the stomach ache, that was the problem. Pepto-Bismol, I started having, and so I was realizing, okay, this isn't good. And what can I do about it? So I started to be more aware of when the urge would come and I was having some kind of unpleasant physical or psychological, mental, emotional sensation. And then I would ride that out a little bit. And then I would reward myself by having some Ben & Jerry's ice cream. I would surf the urge to want to indulge.
Would you eat less though?
And then I would eat less. And I started to have less and put the lid back on. And I would only eat the melted parts.
Yeah.
And then leave the center. I had to, but eventually, and now it's like, I still enjoy some Ben & Jerry's ice cream now and again. But it's not this kind of way of reaching out for something to change the way I feel. So, just an example of something I think that we do a lot.
It's big in America right now to use food to feel good.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, emotional eating. Yeah, I mean, food issues. I mean, that kind of came up a little bit yesterday. Food issues, obsessive, compulsive behavior, bulimia, anorexia. Some of it is attached to or connected to body image, but also I think around distress, discomfort, and back to this idea of mindful consumption. Kind of like when we did the mindful eating, like really slowing down the process, and not to not eat. Like that's not the answer either, right? But to just slow down the process. Same thing with drugs, with alcohol. Slowing down the process and understanding why is this happening right now? What is going on for me here? Okay, so let's turn to the emotional regulation 1 in your book. Yeah.
Just kind of be careful when you walk over there, because I think the room is making, like when the AC unit is on,
Okay.
like more in like that right there. Just be careful.
Okay, yeah, thanks. Oh, I see what that is. Good looking. How are we doing, okay, Bryce, we're good? Okay, so are we at the emotional regulation 1? Just the first page there, it says DBT, emotional regulation. Through emotional regulation, you will learn impulse control and to delay gratification. So this is what I was just giving an example about with my Ben & Jerry's problem. Is learning how to delay gratification. This is very helpful and important piece of information. Does someone want to read just that paragraph, nice and loud? We can all read it together, but will someone read it out loud?
I'll read it out loud.
Thank you. Nice and loud.
Emotional regulation helps you learn about your emotions, achieve a deeper understanding of their emotional life, and develop more resiliency. Thank you. When dealing with your emotions, emotions are part of life. You might believe that you shouldn't have any emotions, or that you should only have positive emotions. When you have unpleasant or painful emotions such as anger, sadness, or loneliness, you can accept these emotions without engaging in problematic destructive behavior.
Thank you. I just found that typo. Okay, so goals of emotional regulation. So the three main pieces here are understand, reduce, and decrease. So this is both for ourselves, but this is primarily we're talking about actually helping our clients and patients, right? To begin to understand. So understand emotions in your experience, right? Identify, observe, and describe emotions. So the ability to observe and describe emotions. So one of the things actually, that's why I like to use there in the next page, there's a series of different stages of emotions or levels of ways of breaking down emotions. These are actually really helpful. We have, those signs with the faces, those posters with the faces, which are, a lot of them are actually negative. Have you noticed that? I don't know if you noticed that or not. We actually changed, one of the agencies I worked for, we changed the faces to there's more faces. We created our own. But I like to go three ways. First, pleasant, unpleasant, neither. Okay, that's the first level. Okay, can you notice that? And then the second level is to, mad, sad, the kind of the 5 basic emotions. And then to actually help people, can you get a little bit more nuanced? So helping people build language around what they're actually feeling. This can be extremely frustrating for some people. What do you mean? I'm bored. What do you mean by bored? What does that mean? Like, look at this list. Is there anything else here that describes the way you feel besides bored? And then sometimes it's actually frustrated, or it's sad, or there's another. So not to just believe bored.
I'm glad you included the next page about feeling words, because a lot of addicts, they don't have words.
Right.
And so it's really a struggle, like you said.
Yes, primarily with the addicted population, especially if they began young, in their teens. The ability to kind of access, it's like, and that's why I start with pleasant and unpleasant, neither.
Yeah.
Okay, well, is this a pleasant feeling? No, it's not pleasant at all. Okay, if it's unpleasant? Yes, it's unpleasant. It's unpleasant. Okay, so we'll start there. Okay, we're on this side now, and then actually just kind of help them. Right? And some of this mindfulness, actually I'm doing mindfulness. I've adopted using mindfulness in my private practice, every individual session, 5 minutes, just 5 minutes. And I actually, sometimes in the beginning, I market myself as a mindfulness-based psychotherapist, so they kind of know what they're getting into when they come to me. And then the other piece is that oftentimes I say it's helpful for me. This is helpful for me to connect to you, so we can, because that way I have, and it actually is helpful. I have 5 minutes where I'm sitting in the field with my patient, and we're connecting on that way, and it allows them to reflect on why are they here. So we just sit and breathe together, or do a body awareness, and that's oftentimes brings up a lot of good stuff. And then what I've also noticed in my private practice around this kind of stuff is that they then begin to, in the middle of their starting to feel kind of emotional overwhelm, they'll stop right in the middle and take a few breaths, be able to kind of identify and then proceed. And I'm then blown away when that happens. And it just encourages me more and more. So this understand, so we're talking about understanding, right? Understanding what emotions do for us too. Not only just identifying and describing, but what they do for us. What are we getting from them? So then also to reduce emotional vulnerability, right? Decrease negative vulnerability to emotion mind. That, remember the emotional mind, the kind of overwhelmed or flooded by emotion. And then to increase positive emotions. So increasing positive emotions, I think it's helpful, but I think it's not a way of avoiding that which is considered a negative emotion. Sometimes in crisis situations, so we have all these self-soothing and using your 6 senses. There's lots of different ways we can engage. But I think it's helpful to just be able to have some language around that, and that the goal there is to reduce emotional vulnerability, so the overwhelm. So then to decrease emotional suffering. Let go of painful emotions through mindfulness. Change painful emotions through opposite action. This concept of opposite action is so helpful because they know what they've been doing. And you can help, you can have your patients or clients describe what they've been doing. They're able. So, and then I actually often say, "And how's that working for you?" "Oh, well, it's not working at all." "Okay, so what's the opposite that you could do? That you can do? What's the opposite action?" And then helping them come up with language for that. And then checking in. This is what some of these diary cards are about and whatnot in the DBT. Checking in. How did that work for you? How many times were you able to make an opposite action? Not with judgment, just curious. And then, because we're working on it, it's a process. "Oh, well, there was one time out of 5. Great. What do you think you can do next week? Do you think you could maybe do 2 times? 3 times? And they might go, "I'm 5 out of 5, I think. I can do 5 out of 5. "Okay, try 5 out of 5. The next week they come back and they did, well, 3 times. Great. 3 times is really great. And what did you notice about when you made an opposite action 3 times? How did the outcome come out differently? And so this is cognitive restructuring, actually. So this is how some of this stuff can be helpful. We're going to skip a few pages in. So it says emotional regulation. Myths about emotion. We're going to do this last one, and then I think we'll take a break for lunch. So the emotional regulation, myths about emotions. So the idea here, like number 1, there was a right way to feel in every situation. This is a myth. And then what you're going to come up with is a challenge. How could you challenge that myth? So if you were, are we all on the same page?
Can you give an example for number 1?
Well, this is the right way to feel in every situation. What would a challenge be for that? There is not always a right way to feel about any situation. If somebody dies, we don't always have to feel sad. We can actually feel angry. We can remember, we can have humor about it, lightheartedness. Maybe actually joy there that they're not suffering anymore. This is a challenge to them. When my uncle just recently died of colon cancer that was caught late because he didn't, he was that strong man that didn't believe in going to the hospital, going to the doctor. And when he died, it was sad, but also there was some joy that he wasn't suffering. Yeah. So in that way, that's our way to challenge. Yeah. So take a few minutes and let's just try to come up with, best you can, come up with understanding of this, come up with thoughts around this. All right. Actually, there's a couple pieces I might read. This is the story of the 2 wolves. Have people heard the story of the 2 wolves? Yes. So one evening, an old Cherokee man told his grandson about the battle that goes on inside all people. He said, "My son, the battle is between 2 wolves inside us all." And my understanding of this story is that it came about not that long ago, like right around 9/11, and there was some question about, like, the grandson, this 7-year-old, 8-year-old grandson is like, why does this happen? How does this happen? Right. So the grandfather is trying to help him understand. You know? Like, why do people do hard things, bad things, horrible things? Why do people make destructive decisions? He said that there's a battle between two wolves inside us all. One is bad. One is anger, envy, jealousy, sorrow, regret, greed, arrogance, self-pity, guilt, resentment, inferiority, lies, false pride, superiority, and ego. The other is good. It is joy, peace, love, hope, serenity, humility, kindness, benevolence, empathy, generosity, truth, compassion, and faith. That we have both or all of these within us. The grandson thought about it for a moment, and then he asked his grandfather, "Which wolf wins, grandfather?" What did he say? "The one you feed." Right? That these qualities are within us, and that the ones that we feed, so the idea is feed the good wolf within us. And we have lots of opportunities to do that throughout our lives, throughout our days, as we start to feel taken over. So I've always just really enjoyed that story and talking about that there actually there's both things are true. It's not one or the other, but that it's a constant can be a constant struggle. So what came up around the emotional regulation, the challenges? Was it hard to come up with challenges for some of them? Yes? I think they're designed to be kind of hard. They're designed to, this idea of cognitive restructuring or cognitive distortion is around how do we shift, look at things from a different perspective. Any thoughts about that? Anything someone want to come up? It was either an easy thing to challenge, you knew right away, or that's how or I was taught this belief, and then I have a really hard time challenging. Either or.
I thought that some of them were kind of easy to challenge, only because I think my personality sometimes I like to challenge people. I challenge, and it's not even because I really feel that way, but I just do it just to throw it out there to get them to talk more. You know, and so some of this stuff, it was kind of easy for me to challenge people.
To come up, because that's the way your mind works, coming up with the opposite or the devil's advocate, taking the opposite position.
Yeah, it opens up your mind too, because you think of another perspective as well. I mean, even though you don't agree with it, but you got to be open to everything.
Some of these, I know with these challenges, we challenge these emotions with our clients. Because the type of culture we're in, they're not expressed the culture here in the Valley, a lot of them are not allowed to express how they feel.
They're within their families or not allowed to express how they feel.
Right, being emotional is out of control. I hear that a lot from clients say that that's a weakness of theirs. It's not their weakness.
Right.
Their family doesn't understand their emotions.
Yes.
And there are control of their emotions, they're expressing how they feel, but their family is trying to negate it.
Right.
So you're, as a case manager, you're going to challenge them in a way that that's not necessarily the case.
Right. So this can maybe be a helpful exercise for them.
Right.
Yeah, how can you challenge that belief, right?
Right,
And
that's
not,
I was like, this
yeah.
is going to be a client. I
Yeah.
don't have to do this.
Yes, very much. Almost everything in this book is both for patients and clients. And there's, in the book, Mindfulness for Teen Anger, there's a lot of these ways of shifting cognitive restructuring that happens that are specific for young people. Anyone else?
I have difficulties processing number 7. All painful emotions are
Uh-huh.
So I associate that, you know, we have feelings and they're normal, but the way we respond, that's what makes a difference to those emotions. But right now that, you know, just right now I was processing it because I couldn't come out with something. But sometimes painful emotions are like when someone dies or there's situations that create those painful emotions, but it doesn't mean that it has nothing to do with the attitude, we just feel it and it's okay.
Absolutely, yeah. Sometimes it doesn't have anything to do, that's the idea there, right? It's not just necessarily about the attitude, it's just sometimes it's just the situation, it's just what's arising. Yeah. We don't have to have necessarily a negative, oh, why am I having this emotion? This whole thing is like, I think it's focused on, so why am I having this emotion? What is this emotion? Why am I having it? And what is my attitude about having it? Right? And that when we're suppressing something that is, because a lot of us are taught to suppress our emotion. Gunny sacking or suppressing, I found a lot. I used to work with this one adolescent, and he was super quiet, and he was very he's like caring. He was quite very sensitive, but he never talked about anything. But then he would drink, and he would become extremely angry and violent. It was Dr. Jekyll Hyde, right? It was Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. That, and then in working with him, is basically my job. He was basically emotional mind, rational mind, emotional mind, rational mind. Alcohol was the key to unlocking the emotional mind. So my job was to help him find the wise mind by accessing and communicating and identifying emotions and what was happening for him and with him when he wasn't in an altered state, because it was finding a way. That which you resist persists. That which you turn to will free you, or will relieve you. Yeah. All right. So I think let's see. I'll go over this last piece. So clinical applications, these are just some things I was kind of thinking about. So balance is the antidote to distress. So this emotional balance, what I was just describing. This idea, this is from a book called One Breath at a Time. In the absence of balance, we take away one thing only to replace it with another. And this is what Griffin calls cross-addiction, right? So if we're trying to change a behavior, we have to have a replacement behavior. This is where that opposite action comes into play. So then this idea, stress is decreased, change is a process and happens more effectively when the mind is calm. So when stress is decreased and change is happening over a long period of time, it's not necessarily going to be quick, but developing calm awareness is going to help facilitate that. So increased self-awareness and self-efficacy. This is one of the applications of mindfulness and DBT, actually. So I'm gonna stop there, and we're gonna do an exercise.